the famous VC firm Sequoia Capital just released an updated market analysis of the generative AI landscape. Now, they titled this Generative AI's Act O1 in reference to OpenAI's new O1 model. And in it, Sequoia partners Sonia Huang and Pat Grady break down how the generative AI ecosystem is evolving. They write, quote, 2 years into the generative AI revolution, research is progressing the field from, quote, thinking fast, rapid fire pre-trained responses to, quote, thinking slow, reasoning at inference time. This evolution is unlocking a new cohort of agentic applications. So they find things like the foundation layer of generative AI is actually stabilizing around some of these major players like Microsoft/OpenAI and Google/DeepMind. Focus, they believe, is now shifting to the development of a reasoning layer. The latest, most significant advancement being, of course, OpenAI's O1 model, which enables this more deliberate system two thinking we've referenced on multiple episodes, as opposed to, say, a quick pattern matching that earlier models have done. And they also think we've gotten to a new scaling law that's emerging. And they claim that the more inference time compute that's given to a model, the better it can reason. So we're shifting a focus from massive pre-training to scalable inference clouds. So basically, the authors argue this is going to have some major effects on business as usual. They even anticipate what they call a future AlphaGo moment in generative AI, where these systems demonstrate truly novel and superhuman capabilities. So, Paul, I know you found a lot to like in this analysis, and obviously Sequoia's like investing on the bleeding edge of AI, so they're absolutely worth paying attention to. Like, what was really worth a look within this report?
I think for our regular listeners, it's a really nice, concise summarization of what we've been talking about for the last 8 to 12 episodes. So as we knew that Strawberry was coming, so we were talking about Strawberry, 10 episodes ago, and then we eventually got the O1 model. We've talked since January about the System 1, System 2 thinking that actually came. Andrej Karpathy had that Intro to LLMs video in January of this year on YouTube that we featured and talked about. That was one of his big things, is giving the machine time to think. We talked about it with the Noam Brown episode and his efforts in poker play and diplomacy, that the more time you give the computer to think, the smarter it seems to get, or the better it seems to be at solving things. So there wasn't anything like groundbreaking and new that came out of this if you're a regular listener. If you're not, it's a really good 5 to 7 minute read where you can kind of catch up on some of the key things that are going on that you highlighted in your overview there, Mike. There's a few things that I thought were interesting just from Sequoia's perspective that I wanted to kind of click into for a minute. One is the foundation models. You mentioned this idea that they thought a couple of years ago that there would end up being like a single model company, which I assume they assumed was OpenAI at the time, or maybe Google, that basically just made everybody else irrelevant and everyone else would kind of play for the scraps. That doesn't appear to be true. When we talked about this, I don't know, maybe 6 episodes ago, where I said, the key to me is GPT-5 a breakthrough, or is it a continuation and just like more compute, more training data went into it, more reinforcement learning? Because it seems like everyone has sort of caught up to OpenAI for the most part, like with Meta and Google. XAI is, on their heels to a degree, where it's hard to know how they're going to truly like leap ahead and spend another year and a half with a better model than everybody else. So Sequoia was sort of saying this, that it just seems like we're now like every 3 to 6 months, the other model companies catch up to whoever had the most recent, most powerful model. The inference time compute thing came out of the O1 paper from OpenAI. And again, Noam Brown, who was at Meta and is now at OpenAI. This is like his main thing. It's why he went to OpenAI. It's to work on this reasoning thing, which is the basic premise is the system one, system two thinking. So system one is, what's the capital of Ohio? And it's like, okay, it's Columbus. Like, real quick, it is Columbus, right? Like, I'm thinking of the
Yes.
top of my
Okay.
So
I
that's,
paused as well. I was like,
yeah,
is it?
that's system one. Like, it's just a fact-based thing. There's no real thought process other than memorization that goes into this retrieval and memorization. That's it. That's system one thinking. System two thinking is, why did they decide to make Columbus the capital of Ohio? Well, now I got to stop and actually kind of like think about this, and I got to do some research, and I got to go through some steps. Like, that's a more system two style thinking. And so that's the basic premise. Is what they're saying is, when we give the machine time to think, it seems to be able to do much more complex things in like math and biology and chemistry and all these things. Business strategy, when you start to bring this back to our world. And so that's what they're looking at. The one thing that they didn't really say like explicitly within this, that I sort of like was thinking about, is the more and more I think about this, the more I believe that what ends up happening is Google, Meta, OpenAI, Microsoft probably gets back in the game with their own frontier models, NVIDIA, they're all going to spend their Anthropic, they're going to spend their billions of dollars building these massively powerful, approaching AGI, eventually getting to AGI models that are generally capable of almost all cognitive tasks. But those models are always going to cost the most money to run and to use. And the reality is, many of the use cases in business, like helping us write our emails or brainstorming ideas, building a marketing strategy, those don't require a $10 billion frontier model to do. We could do that with like GPT-4 level stuff. Like, that might be good
Right.
enough.
Right.
So I'm envisioning this world where there's 4 or 5 dominant frontier models that are all approaching or at AGI a year or 2 or 3 from now. But we don't use those models daily in our lives. What's happening is that model almost functions as like the project manager, like the overseer of all the other models and agents that live within it. And so when we go into ChatGPT, instead of having to pick from one of the 4 models, which makes no sense from a user experience, how am I supposed to know which model to pick? I just put in my prompt. And then the most powerful model figures out which model is actually best to solve that, calls on that model to do its thing. And maybe there's like a symphony of dozens of these things, and unknown to us, we're just putting our prompt in. But behind the scenes, you start to get this symphony of agents and models working together to do the thing for us. And I'm almost like 99% sure that's what ends up happening. Because us picking models for ourselves makes no sense from user experience. Only for developers does that make sense. To the average user, a marketer, an entrepreneur, a lawyer, like, how do they know which model to pick? O1 Preview, O1 Mini, 4.0, 4.0 Advanced, Gemini 1.5 Pro, like, who knows?
Right.
So I think that happens. And then the thing they called out is like, and you and I have talked about this idea of like these AI software companies that are just wrappers for the model, meaning if I work directly with OpenAI, use ChatGPT, I'm using the model directly through OpenAI. If I go use, I don't know, like Conmigo, I'll say, because I was using that example. If I'm using Conmigo, that's a wrapper for OpenAI's model specifically tuned for education. They don't build their own models at Khan Academy. They're building on top of it. So they're a wrapper, a software wrapper. Those wrappers kind of got, no pun intended, a bad rap like a year ago. We all kind of assumed that they would just be eaten up. What did Sam say? They would steamroll them or something, I
Right.
think, like if
Right.
they were useless. So we assumed these wrappers that in the first, 6 months after ChatGPT were raising 10 million, 20 million, whatever, that they were just going to become worthless. What Sequoia is saying is no, that these wrappers are actually critical because it requires domain expertise to build like a legal assistant or a customer service assistant or, a marketing agency assistant. And that's actually where the knowledge or the value will accrue in the venture capital world, is at the wrapper layer for people that build these domain specific things. So I don't know, like, again, nothing in this article to me was like, oh my God, I didn't know that, because we're living it every day.
Yeah.
But it definitely summarized it in a really nice way. And it allowed me to sort of step back and have some more macro level thoughts that I maybe haven't like given my brain time to think about for a few weeks or a few months. So again, a really good read. It's a pretty approachable read. It's not highly technical. if you're struggling with it, drop it into Notebook LM and like, ask it to explain it to you at a seventh grade level. Like, and I'm not joking about that. Like that, it's a truly great function of Notebook LM to do it that way. So yeah, again, all three of the things we've covered, these main topics, all really good reads and really good kind of macro level stuff for people to understand.
Yeah, that's why I like the big picture, like zooming out a bit, because even if you are a listener, it can be a regular listener and you're following this stuff, it can be really hard sometimes to frame like, you know, this is a very different landscape than it was 6 months ago
Yeah.
or a year ago. Like that doesn't seem like that long of a time, but really we're starting to see how this is evolving and just you can't use the old mental model of like, oh, well, it's like just a prediction machine or it's just like making predictions or it's like, the prompts are okay. Like, no, go read this
Yeah.
article. You'll see quickly how things are moving.
Yeah, and it's helpful just to like, I mean, it's a fire hose. Like what we're all trying to like process right now is just a fire hose of information and
Mm.
names and companies and model numbers, and it's a lot. And so whenever you can get these articles that just do a nice job of giving us like, hey, here's the 3 to 5 themes to be thinking about right now. Like that's what we try and do with our podcast, but we love it as just, people seeking knowledge too. Like I always love when I can just step back and say, okay, what are the 3 to 5 things they're saying? And does it jive with what we're thinking? Or is this actually like a different perspective that we should be considering when we're talking about on our show? So yeah, good. Appreciate Sequoia and Brookings and New York Times for putting out some good stuff.